My name's Robert Barry. Welcome to my home. I'm pretty proud of this darn place here in the desert. It's taken me a lot to get here. I want to share some of those stories with you. Some stories like hitchhiking in the Himalayas, marriage and divorce, a whole lot of risk taking, and much more. But let me put my stuff away and take care of Mila, okay? Come on in.
Come on, Mila. Come on.
In 23 days, 14 hours, and 37 minutes, I am going to find out whether I will have lost approximately 24, 25, $26,000 to a crypto scam. Let's talk about it today, you guys. So I decided today, on July 8th, to go ahead and document the journey, my emotional journey, maybe a technical journey of this experience that I'm sitting in right now, because there's effectively a pool of money. It's really some crypto tokens that is soon to possibly get snagged by a scammer, or I might be able to get it back. And yeah, it's been an emotional journey really the past few days, thinking and feeling this. And I want to tell you about this, what originally happened, how I got here, and where we're going, and what possibilities exist. And as we go along this journey, I'm glad you're here with me. Hopefully, you're going to learn a little bit of crypto, what to do, what not to do, and what is crypto. We might as well go ahead and talk about that. It was the talk of the town back in 2021 when the bull market was raging. And not so much lately, AI is on everyone's mind, but I think you're going to find within the next few months, especially if the so-called Clarity Act passes, it's going to be back on everyone's mind because we're likely to enter another bull market phase of the crypto market. So let me tell you a little bit about how we got here. And I put out a video before. I'll put a link down in the comments to a video where I talked about I lost $5,000 on July 4th, part of this scam. And that $5,000, that's gone. Definitely is gone. And now there's a bigger kind of chunk of value, you might say, that's sitting in this weird situation for me. Am I going to get it back or not? And I have some help along the way. And in this space, trusting people, it's kind of not looked, it's sort of looked down upon, I should say. You really got to know what you're doing. And it's at this, and I've been in this game for a long time now at this point. I still made a silly mistake. I gotta just laugh at myself. So, I still have my health. I still have a beautiful home I'm living in. I have some friends, I have, family. So, don't cry for me, Argentina. Let's just say that. I laugh, but even earlier today, I was literally crying. There's a little bit of tears of joy earlier, but it's been an emotional up and down. You can imagine. And I think about where I've come from, and 20 whatever we're talking about, 25. Let's just say $25,000. That's a significant chunk of money. No doubt about it. You got to know $5,000 is a significant chunk of money. So this counter on the screen here you've seen, and that's to when it all comes to fruition, where it's going to be bot versus bot, in a very quick little interaction, and I'll pretty much immediately know at that time whether I'm going to be successful in getting those tokens, that value, that money, however you want to think about it. We'll talk about that later, whether I'm going to get that back or not. At this point, I've just resigned myself to it's gone, right? I think that's maybe the healthiest way for me to respond to this situation and just kind of move forward. And if it comes back to me, great. That's sort of a silver lining. I'll be really happy about that. But I need to move on and just consider it gone. And yeah, maybe there's some lesson in there about that. That's kind of the way I look at a lot of things in my life. I'm sure you guys have been knocked down. This whole channel that I'm creating here on YouTube is called The Struggle Sessions, because I know we're all struggling at one point or another. We have highs, we have lows, and how do we deal with that? So I'm hoping to get into that with you through the next 23 days. And we'll see what happens. So let me tell you a little bit about my background. I was introduced actually into this entire space by a former student of mine. And yeah, I'm not going to dox him. I've talked about him to my students. I have about thousands of students at this point under my belt. And my background is physics. That's mostly what I teach. I do teach presentations as well. But this student, we're going to call him Sensei. It's a great name because he was a student of mine and then I became a student of his many years later. I lost contact with him for a decade or something. And then he grew up and he's whip smart, way smarter than me. And he introduced me to this whole space. And boy, when I first was introduced to crypto, I was like, this sounds like a scam. And I think a lot of people, if you don't know anything about crypto, you just hear about it, sounds like some get rich quick scheme. And, that can happen, but there's so much more going on here. In fact, as we speak over years, the technology behind this, a lot of people maybe prefer the term blockchain technology. It's a visual descriptor of how this technology works. Right. And what it's being used for is to reinvent the financial plumbing of the entire world. And it is happening. It's not like maybe it will or maybe it won't. It is happening. It is being adopted because it has certain properties that are ideal for financial instruments. It's going to reduce financial friction, right? That saves money, that saves value. There's all sorts of new kind of financial products you can create. So I guess let me mention one of the things. People think it's very scammy and you can hide things. It's actually more traceable than cash, really. People say it's pseudo-anonymous. Really think every transaction in this technology, on this blockchain, can be traced. It's all out there. So in fact, law enforcement, once they understand this, they realize it's a great tool for them. They can really trace hackers. So yeah, and it was, I don't know, 2019. Well, I already knew about crypto, back in 2016, 2017, I didn't know too much about it though. I dabbled into it a little bit. It was really 2019 when I had this discussion with Sensei that he made me go, he convinced me rather to go and look deeply into this. And I took the deep dive. And when I take a deep dive, you guys, I tell a lot of people I don't have hobbies, I have obsessions. So I got obsessed. And luckily, the particular piece of technology that I'm really interested in, a piece of this blockchain technology, it went through a nice growth period, including its price. And I think that probably, incentivized me further to really look in. And I remember I used to catalog hours of research and, well beyond 1,000 hours. I mean, I stopped thinking about that, but now I don't focus on technical details. And so that might be something that's a little confusing at first. Like, how did this guy get scammed? Right? To understand various things, you can understand at different levels. I've heard this good analogy by Sean Carroll. He's a very well-known physicist. He does a lot of talks for the public, and he does this great talk. He does it with this Buddhist. What is his name? Wallace. I can't remember his name, but in this discussion, they're talking about knowing things, right? And Sean Carroll brings up the idea of a smartphone, and you might ask someone, "Do you know how a smartphone works?" And there are levels to this. You have a smartphone. Do you know how a smartphone works? Sure, you do for your purposes, right? You can turn the smartphone on. You know how to charge the smartphone. You know how to download apps. You know how to interact with apps. Right? So you have all you use cameras and maybe you call people, but people don't actually use it as a phone so much anymore. You have the whole internet access there, right? So you have a good understanding at sort of the highest level of a smartphone. But on the other hand, do you know how the apps are actually programmed onto your phone? Right? What's going on there? When you delete an app or file, do you understand really what's going on there at a deeper level? This is where maybe computer science, computer programming comes in, and those guys have a good understanding at that level of what's going on. And you using the smartphone, you don't really need to know that, right? It makes no difference. You're operating at a different level with the smartphone. You could go deeper and say, well, okay, well, when you do delete some file, what's the underlying logic behind that? And you can dive into um, transistors and logic gates and how they all work on mathematical operations to perform these higher level tasks like deleting, right? So there's another deeper level. And then we can go even a little bit deeper where you're now getting into some stuff that, kind of I know about. So I have good experience at the very highest level. I can turn on my smartphone because I know how to turn it on. I can work apps. Took me some time. I also, from my physics background, have some understanding that, well, what's going on in these logic gates? There are electrons moving around, right? Now we're talking about some physics, and there are some constraints on if you're moving electrons around, you're shrinking down the size of these circuit boards. You run into certain quantum mechanical constraints. And I think all that's very, very interesting, right? There's another deeper level of understanding the smartphone. Something is true of many things, right? You think about maybe a car. You can operate a car, sure, at some high level. Do you know how to fix the car? Do you know how to build the car? Do you know how to manufacture the metal in such a way that it can be used to construct the car? There's all sorts of ways to know things. So when I talk about having my own understanding of crypto or blockchain technology, or people even calling it Web3, there's all sorts of names for this. My level of understanding is sort of the highest levels of the high level. And that doesn't mean I'm smart about it or something. It just means I think about economic incentives as to why the technology is going to be used. I have some understanding of what I consider the various disciplines involved, which I think about as effectively mathematics. It's kind of the cryptography involved. That's why it's called crypto. That's math. There's mathematical guarantees built in. There's economics. There's economic incentives built in, right? What's so interesting about Bitcoin, and why is it difficult to sort of hack the Bitcoin network? You could go and do some reading on a 51% attack, and there's economic incentives built in. I think that's really very, very cool and interesting. Okay, so these really high level pieces are what convinced me long ago that this technology is definitely going to be taken on by banks and approved by regulators. And eventually it's going to underlie the entire financial world. Now, you guys out there, you're probably never going to interact with it because it's a bit below the surface, right? So you might not ever see it. People like to say this technology is not really for retail, the deeper technology, right? I often consider Bitcoin as sort of one thing. It's an interesting instrument, but below that, there are what people call crypto utilities, which are related to smart contracts. And we'll get into that probably in a later video. Okay, so that's my understanding. So, yeah, how did I get hacked? Because I don't have the technical understanding. And I was stupid. I did some really stupid things. July 4th, it was literally 4 a.m. I get up super early, guys. It was 4 a.m. and I was getting ready to go on this group bicycle ride. I'm a big avid bicyclist. And I was trying to hurry and do something. And effectively, I was trying to eke out a little more value. I was trying to eke out a little bit more for myself. And when I was doing that, I did a stupid move. And effectively, what had happened is I did something that allowed my screen to be shared. So I was sharing my screen with the hacker unbeknownst to myself. And when I did that, I exposed what is called my private keys. The private key is a way to access your tokens. When you have that private key, you have complete access. Anybody that has the private key has complete access to all those tokens, and they can move them wherever they want. Right? This is a big no-no. You want to keep a hold of those private keys and never show anybody, right? Not even grandma, not Aunt Martha. Don't let them have your private keys. And I did another video about taking your key and kind of splitting into 3, and you might give a piece of your key to someone else. That can actually provide some enhanced security. But yeah, the hacker got my private key. You guys, and if you guys know crypto out there, you're probably like, this guy's a dummy. Yeah, sometimes I'm a dummy. I make a lot of mistakes. Part of the reason, again, for this channel, I'm a guy that makes a lot of mistakes. I'll say it again. My favorite quote by Niels Bohr, an expert is a man who's made all the mistakes possible in a very narrow field. Yeah, I've got a lot more mistakes to make, you guys. So July 4th, 4 a.m., my private key gets exposed to a hacker. Unbeknownst to me, I go on my bicycle ride. I come back and I look at that wallet, and it's immediately clear that the tokens, and I had a bunch of different things on there. There were really 3 main ones, and then a lot of smaller value, like tiny value, what people like to call dust. Gone. Boy, my heart dropped. And I made a video about losing $5,000 worth of tokens. And here's the kicker, that why I'm starting this video at this countdown. Where are we at now? 23 days, 14 hours, 20 minutes, and 45 seconds. I realized not but a few, it might have been a day or two later, I then realized that this particular crypto wallet was associated with some other tokens that I had that were locked in a smart contract. They are locked in that smart contract as we speak. And luckily, the place where they're locked, if you want to remove them, you have to interact with your private key with that smart contract. And this particular smart contract has a so-called cooldown period. The cooldown period is 28 days. And so when you initiate that interaction to try to remove the tokens, there's the cooldown period. It's going to take 28 days for that to happen. So I realized this, a couple days after July 4th. I don't remember exactly. It might have been July 6th. And oh boy, you guys, I just realized my mistake was a bit bigger than $5,000. So there's a bit of a race going on. The hacker is going to try and grab those tokens when a particular block in this blockchain is produced. So very briefly, blockchain, what happens is it's kind of like a spreadsheet. It's kind of simple like that. There's a spreadsheet that has all the addresses, all the wallets, and the values that are in those wallets. And then another block is produced, and it updates where all the tokens are in all the various wallets. And from one block to the next, there's all sorts of things can happen. But one thing can happen is tokens get transferred from one wallet to the next. And, I know the Bitcoin network does a new block is produced every 10 minutes. Now, Ethereum back in the day was like 3 seconds. They've also had some updates. I have to check and see if that's changed. So there's a particular block that's going to be produced on August 4th where it all goes down. It's all going to happen in that block, and I'll immediately know what is going to happen with my tokens. So, oh boy. Before I wrote, so when I remembered that I had these additional tokens, I was really sunk. And then I remembered that the cooldown period happens. So I thought, okay, I know some people that might be able to help me. and I have, I'm talking to sort of three different entities, two people, two friends, and another entity that I'm probably going to use at the end of the day, a group called Flashbots. And it's really ironic, honestly. Flashbots is really ironic. I think they have the strongest technical skills to actually help me here. But I was made aware of Flashbots a few years ago. I read this article by Ed Felton. He used to work with the White House. I think it was, I might be speaking incorrectly. It might have been under Obama. He was like a chief technical officer or something like that. And he was also at Princeton, and he started a group called Arbitrum, which is related to the Ethereum blockchain to kind of help speed things up and all sorts of other issues. I remember reading this article about something called MEV, minor extractable value. And it talked about this group called Flashbots and what they were doing and how they, when these blocks are being produced, how they could kind of game the system in a sense. And there's arguments about whether that's morally wrong or not. I mean, the thing is, anything that happens in the blockchain is completely transparent. And so it's kind of like hacker isn't maybe the right word when you're talking about this, maybe exploiter. They're just looking at the rules and utilizing in a way that is advantageous to themselves, right? So Flashbots was doing this in some transactions. And when I read about this, for me, it was kind of like, I don't ever see how banks are going to adopt this technology unless this issue of MEV is resolved in some way, right? And now we're getting down to the technical weeds. And, some of you guys out there know this better than I do, but that was my concern at the time, right? And I figured there's going to be some resolution to that at some point when I was reading that. But that was my introduction, nonetheless, to Flashbots. I didn't really like those guys. And here we are, years later. Those guys might be saving my ass. It's kind of a funny story of life. It reminds me of, I think it's a Chinese sort of proverb where this man, he's like a farmer or something, has some horses, and one day one of his horses runs away, and his neighbors, tell him, and he kind of has a flat affect. He doesn't really respond to that in any emotional way. And the neighbors are kind of like, what? You just lost like a valuable piece of your property. This horse has run away. And he's like, nah, he just shrugs it off. The story continues. And when a few days later, his horse returns, and running with his horse are 5 other horses, 5 wild stallions. So, the idea is his horse went out and commingled with some of these other horses and cajoled them back. And now the farmer has additional horses. And the neighbors are just like, oh my gosh, aren't you so excited and happy about this happening? Well, the farmer sort of shrugs, just says, yeah, I'm not sure. It is what it is. Well, when one of those wild horses after some time was carrying a disease, and so that disease spread, and some of those horses died. Okay, so the story continues like that, and the idea is you just don't know the twists and turns of life. What you think might be good one day turns out to be bad the next. I've seen this play out in my own life, and I wonder if you guys have seen that play out in your life. This reminds me of the idea of making meaning in life. How do you make meaning of a particular event? Like, this event right now is happening, and what meaning am I going to make out of it? I just lose some money. Maybe a part of this is I should be a little more careful, right? And maybe that lesson will help me later. There's maybe a silver lining to all that. You never know which way life is going to take you. So I think that's a good thing to consider when you're struggling in life. The struggles, I often think, they build character, and we're not sure where life is going to take us next. Does life have meaning? You might even question that and say, you're a physicist. It's just random interactions. Well, let's talk a little physics. I'm going to relate this to something in physics I think is really quite interesting. And this goes back to Einstein's theory of general relativity. Right? Very famous theory. I don't know if you guys realize this, but Einstein never got a Nobel Prize for relativity, special nor general. He did get one, but it wasn't for those. But they're immensely powerful, right? Immensely powerful. Really interesting. When Einstein was thinking about his theory of general relativity, was developing it, there's this thought experiment he was going through. He was imagining a man falling in an elevator near the surface of the earth. And if you're technically oriented out there, you'll know this argument really needs a uniform gravitational field, and near the earth, a sphere of mass. It's not quite that, but never mind that, you guys. Never mind that. Let's just forget that. That's technical details. A man falling in an elevator. Often in physics, we'd think that's like an accelerating kind of situation. Something dropping towards the earth, meaning it's speeding up, speeding up. And there's certain properties of that frame. Einstein realized that this frame of reference is the same as if this man was out in outer space, far away from any gravitational field. And why are they the same? Because any experiment you perform would give you the same identical results in either situation. Right? That's what it really comes down to. That's my point here. This is a fascinating idea, but I don't want to get into the details. Those two situations, technically we call them frames of reference. Those two situations are identical because we cannot do anything to determine the difference. And so what physics tells us is that it's not that they're just sort of the same. They are the same. They're the same, you guys. Does life have meaning or does it not have meaning? As far as I can tell, you can't do an experiment to determine the difference between those two. Right? You can play the game of life using this idea that you're going to make meaning out of everything in your life. Or you can play the game of life and say it's just kind of random interactions and I'm just going to roll with those punches. Because you can't run any kind of experiment. There's nothing you can do to determine the difference between those two. I'm going to claim right here, they're the same. They are the same. And so to me, that says you have a choice as to which one you're going to operate in, which frame of reference you're going to operate in. And the vast majority of people, I think, at least have a better mental state when they choose meaning. Meaningless kind of existence, random interactions. A lot of people say that leads to nihilism. It's just, who cares? Do whatever you want. Doesn't matter. The sun's going to go red supergiant at some point. It's going to eat us all up. It's going to eat my tokens up on the blockchain. Who cares? Well, I'll leave you to make that choice as you wish. But I've made my choice. And it's not the choice I've always had, actually. This is something my mom actually brought up when I was young. We were talking about things having meaning. And, I just said, that's nonsense. That's nonsense. And I can see some utility in that now. All right, you guys, a little introduction to where I'm going, where I'm at. I'll be back tomorrow and we're going to talk a little more crypto. I can hear my dog Mila. She's barking. She's getting ready for dinner and she doesn't like to wait. So I better get going. I got to feed her. If you're struggling, let me know in the comments. I'd like to hear your stories. And you're going to see some stories from some of my friends, some former students about some of their struggles and how they've dealt with it. I think that connects us, right? There's a piece of meaning. Let's share some struggles and, at the end of the day, smile about it, laugh about it. That tends to be for me a good bit of medicine, a little bit of humor. I'll see you guys on day 22. Am I going to lose that $25,000? I hope you guys have a good day. And if you're struggling, maybe try to find some meaning in it. I'll see you next time.